key drivers are there's a population growth that's much higher in Australia than other countries, and we're not producing enough housing. So at the moment there's a 200,000 dwelling shortage. We expect that to grow. We'll get onto another slide that has that. Australia's population growth has been over 2% in recent years, and it's now about 1.6%. So just to put that into context, most of our major developed economies that we compare ourselves to are at or below 1%, and 1%, assuming you've got a supply-demand balance, is considered the number at which you'll have a healthy property market. So we're well above that. You know, in 2009 we had over 440,000 people come to Australia as new migrants, generally skilled migrants under skilled migration visas as permanent residents. And from an economic perspective, it's fascinating to think about, if you say that's 2.1% moved to Australia, and if you think that in how much of that represents our GDP growth. So if the average person who moves to Australia buys exactly the same amount as a typical Australian in that year, the vast majority of our growth that year was imported through migration. Right? The reality is they actually consume a lot more than the average Australian that's been here for a long time, because they've got to buy a new house, new car, new TV, all that stuff that you consume when you first move to a country, which is actually a key driver for the Australian economy. We can import growth into Australia in a way that other countries are unable to do, because it's an attractive place to come to. We've got low unemployment, we've got high incomes. And that imported growth that we're seeing is a big driver that the Australian government has, and they've just tweaked it again in their skilled migrant visas. So when the economy's a bit soft, change the rules in terms of skilled migration, more people move to Australia, creates GDP growth. So it's an interesting lever that the government has. Housing affordability, look, compared to other countries, the multiple is high. We've generally got dual incomes in Australia, we've got negative gearing, so it's probably not a good comparison point, but compared to recent years, we've got much better affordability than we have had. And I think it's more a crisis of confidence rather than a crisis of fundamentals. Rental returns are improving. Again, that's being driven by this lack of supply. We think it's going to worsen dramatically in coming years, which will mean that rents will push up towards levels that we haven't seen in some time. Mining investment, that's a big driver. Again, there's $260 billion of approved projects underway, and those regions that are benefiting from that. So it's, I guess, where we're at in the cycle, we've seen elevated commodity prices, which has then attracted capital to that sector, and then there's an expansion in capacity. So that's kind of the point at which we are now, that expansion of capacity. And that's when the mining service sector really comes into play. So places like Mackay, where the mining service sector is based, it's labour intensive during that construction period, and it's also intensive during that management of those mines and the infrastructure assets and the ports. So certain regions are getting a lot of population growth, and that's a driver for the property markets. Look, this chart here on the left shows population growth for about a 10-year period. Now we've ended at 2009 just to show that elevation between 2004 and 2009. It peaked at 2.1% and it's back at about 1.6, but it shows compared to the UK and the US, it's dramatically higher rate of growth. Right, and interestingly that, and we'll show on another slide, it's corresponded with a period of lower construction levels, and now we hit the GFC and it's dramatically worsened. So we think these elevated population growth levels combined with difficulty to get projects out of the ground is going to worsen this undersupply scenario. Population growth, I mean, compared to most other major developed economies, and also we've put some of the Asian growth economies in there, we've got the highest relative rate of growth. Australia's going to have 35 million people in 2030, so it's a big number. And it's a lot of houses we need to build, and I don't see in the current approval process that we have and the current town planning situation we have and the current funding situation we have, it doesn't look like anywhere near that number will get built in the foreseeable future.